Good day, grade 12 learners, together with your grade 12 educators. I hope you guys are doing well. This is Mr. Nyaile from Grassland Secondary School. So today we will be focusing on cost accounting. We can also call it a manufacturing. All right, thank you so much. I think now we can start with our presentation. As we can see, before we can go to the grade 12 content, I want us to check or test and see that this has been a build-up blocks from the grade 10. In grade 10, we still did the topic of manufacturing, but in grade 10, the focus was only on the concepts as well as the calculations. Now, when you go to grade 11, we still continued with the concepts, and then we also introduced the concept of the break-even point, which I will be able to highlight or explain more at the later stage. And then secondly, we also focus on different ledger accounts. Example, we did the raw material account, we did the work in progress account, and then we also did the finished goods account. So those were the main accounts that we did in grade 11. But however, in grade 12, we're still going to continue with the concepts again with regard to manufacturing business. We will still continue with the questions again as well with regard to the cost that will incur when we run this business. And then the new thing that we are going to learn again, it will be the production cost statement. Remember, in manufacturing business, the aim is to make a profit. But before you can make a profit, you must be able to produce the goods. But however, you need to look at how much did you spend. So when you do the production cost statement, you'll be able to identify how much will be spent by producing those goods so that you can be able to add your markup percentage. And then secondly, we are also going to look at the abridged income statement, meaning we still need to know whether we are making a profit or a loss in this manufacturing business as well. So we will also deal with the abridged income statement in the in grade 12 syllabus. And then lastly, it will be a break-even point analysis. We are still going to continue as we have started with it in grade 11. This simply means we continue again in grade 12 as well. So these are the main content that we are going to cover in grade 12 with regard to this topic. But however, for today, our objectives will be as follows, meaning by the end of this lesson, we want you to understand all the concepts that are related to the manufacturing business. And then we are going to do them one by one so that you can be able to understand them. And then secondly, we want you to understand how to calculate the direct material cost. In other words, how much did you spend on the material that you're going to use to produce your product. So we are going to show you how are you going to get to the cost or how to calculate it. And then the third one, it will be the direct labor cost. Remember, when we produce, we need people that are going to make those particular products. So we also have to calculate how much are we going to spend on those people as well. And then the other one that you also have to know by the end of this lesson is the factory overhead cost. Remember, when you run a factory, there will be other costs that will be related to the factory. So you still need to calculate how much are you going to spend. So by the end of this lesson, you'll also know how to calculate the factory overheads. And then the other one is going to be the production cost statement. Remember, on the overview or on the prior knowledge, I spoke about the production cost statement. This is one of the financial statements that must be implemented or done in this topic about in the manufacturing business. So basically, you are going to learn the format of the production cost statement in this lesson, as well as how to do the calculations or how to prepare the statement. So these are the objectives of what we need to understand or what we need to learn after this lesson. And I hope by the end of this lesson, all the objectives will definitely be achieved. And then now the concepts, as I said, we're going to start with the concepts. The first concept that we're going to deal with is a manufacturing business. So we need to understand what type of business are we dealing with. So this is the business that makes the product. For example, if we want to sell a table, it means we can be able to buy and sell it, or we can be able to produce it or create it from scratch. So basically, the business that we are going to deal with, we are talking about the business that makes the product. So a manufacturing business is a business that makes the product. So our overview will be based on this business. So we are going to look at the concepts that are going to be related or affect this business. And then the first concept is going to be a direct material cost. So in other words, before you can start to produce, you need to know which materials are you going to use. So therefore, the direct material will be guiding you on what type of material are you going to use, and then how much are you going to spend on those materials. So when we refer to a direct material cost, we are referring to all the materials that are directly involved in the production. Let's make an example that we want to produce a table. If we want to make a table, it means for us to have a table, first of all, we need to have a wood. So a wood will now represent the direct material, because without a wood, we are unable to make the table. So therefore, hence we are saying the direct materials are those materials that are directly involved in the production process. And then the second concept is going to be direct labor. As I explained earlier, I said for us to make a table, it means we need people who are going to make it. But firstly, we need to design it. So once it has been designed and then we have a picture of a table that we want to make, it means now we need people who are going to make that table. So basically, if those people are not there, we cannot be able to have a table. So therefore, direct labor are those employees or workers who are directly involved in the production process. It means without them, we cannot be able to make a table. But if they are there, it means the table can be produced. That is the second concept. And then the next concept is factory overheads. Now, these are the costs that are related to the factory. Like, for example, in the factory, let's say we are still making a table. So when we make a table, it means if we have to cut the wood into a certain piece, it simply means we are going to use electricity. So that electricity in the factory will now be the factory overhead cost. At the same time, in the factory, we know that we would have people who will clean around maybe the mess that we have made while we are cutting this wood into a nice shape of a table. So the factory must be cleaned. So all those people who will be cleaning in the factory, we are going to regard them as our factory overhead. And while they are also cleaning, it means we are using water. They are going to use water to clean. So therefore, it will also be the factory overhead cost, because those costs will be in the factory. So they are related to the factory while we are busy producing the final goods. That is why we are saying the factory overhead costs are the costs that are related to the factory. And then the next concept is going to be the prime cost. Now, the prime costs are both direct costs that are involved in the production process. So if we were to calculate the prime cost, it means we're going to take the direct material together with the direct labor. When you add them together, they will definitely give you a prime cost, because they represent the direct costs that are needed for the production to take place. And then the next concept is going to be a unit cost. Remember, once we produce, we spend a certain amount of money. But once we have spent that money, maybe let's say you spend it 20,000, and then now you produced, let's say, 5 units. So it means by the units cost, we are simply saying we want to know how much did we spend to produce one item, so that as when we add the profit on one item, we know how much can be added, because at least we know how much it we spend. So when you talk about the unit cost, we are talking about a cost to produce one item, or how much does it cost the business to produce one item. Like in my example here, we said 20,000 is the total cost that we have spent to produce only 5 tables. So if we want to know how much we spent to produce one, we would only say 20,000 divided by 5. It simply means it will cost the business only 4,000 to produce one table. And then if we decide to sell it 6,000, then we know that we are going to make a profit of 2,000. So that is an example that I wanted to make practically so that we are able to understand the unit cost. And then we continue with our concept. And then the next one is a fixed cost. When we refer to a fixed cost, we are referring to the cost that remains constant. It means they don't change as the level of production changes. Even if we produce more, the cost remains the same. Even if we produce less, the cost, they still remain the same. So we make a practical example with rent. No matter how much product have you produced, if you are renting a building for 10,000, whether you produce 10 units, whether you produce 1,000 units, you are still going to pay that 10,000 rent a month because it's a fixed amount that must be paid. It cannot change as the level of production change, meaning it does not going to be affected or influenced by the production. It's the cost that remains the same. And then the next concept is the variable cost. Like the word says, variable. It comes from the word vary. It means these are the costs that changes as the level of production changes. This simply means the more you produce, the more cost you incur. The less you produce, the less you're going to spend on variable costs. Let's make a practical example. Let's say for us to produce one table, we need maybe 2 wood, or let's make an example of 2 wood. Now, if, for example, you want to produce 5 tables, it means now we are going to need 10 wood, which is regard to material. It means the more we produce, the more we are going to spend on materials. Secondly, with regard to labor, if it takes one person to make 1 table, and then now suddenly we want to produce 10 tables, it means we are going to need 10 people. So the more we produce, the more variable cost we incur in the business. And then the next concept, it will be the variable cost. I think it's repeating itself. The unit cost also repeat themselves. And then the next one is an indirect material. Indirect material are those materials that are not directly involved in the production process. They are all the materials that are not directly involved in the production process. For example, let's say we want to, like we are producing a table. So once we cut the wood into a table, it is not going to shine, it is not going to look nice. So therefore, we'll have to buy a certain product so that we can be able to polish it, maybe like varnish, just to make it shine so that when the customer comes, it is able to attract the customer by the way it looks. So we are just finishing it up to make it more friendly, or maybe we are trying to make it more attractive to the customer. So we are trying to build. So those are just an indirect material that can also be used. Even if we can make an example with bread. Once you produce bread, you cannot sell bread without a plastic. So meaning that plastic that is going to put the bread inside it, we can also refer it as an indirect material, because after all, after you have produced, it means you need it, because you can't sell bread the way it is. Why? Because the bread could get dry. And then once the bread gets dry, it simply means the customers are not going to be happy. So therefore, when we use that plastic to, the plastic that we put the bread in, it simply means it is going to help us to ensure that our product is fresh, and then the customer will be able to buy it. So those are indirect material. They are indirectly involved in the production process. And then the next concept is indirect labor. So this one refers to all the other employees who are not directly involved in the production process. Let's make an example in the factory. In the factory, while other employees are working, which we refer to them as the direct laborers, they sometimes need a supervisor or the factory foreman, a person who will be able to guide them while they're still doing their work. So those people, then we refer to them as the indirect laborers. They are not directly involved, but they are also part and parcel of the process, but they are not directly involved. Secondly, in the very same factory, like I said, we are going to have cleaners, people who are going to clean, because we cannot always produce in an environment that is not clean. So basically those employees that will be cleaning, we also regard them as the indirect labor because they are also working in the factory. And then another one, we can also have a security guard, because in most cases, we'll have a security guard to protect our goods that we have produced, maybe in the storeroom and so forth, but in the factory. While we have those security guards in the factory, it means they will also fall under the indirect labor. Are all the employees or workers who are not directly involved in the production process. And then now, I think we are done with all the concepts that we are supposed to do. So what we need to do now is the activity, and I hope with the concept that I've explained, everybody now is clear. And then I believe again that your respective teachers, they have indeed give you this answer book in front of you, all of you, you have it. And then I just want you to put it next to you, so that as in when we do the activity, you do the activity along with me. Before I answer these questions, I want us to look at the following answer book. Let's look at 1.2.2. There's a question that says we need to calculate the direct material cost. Now, before we do the calculations or before we go to the question, there is a formula that one needs to know and understand. Now, the formula will go as follows. It will be the opening balance plus the purchases, because remember, we normally purchase the material during the year, plus carriage on purchases. Now, this carriage on purchases can also be referred to as a transport. So don't get confused. Now, I said when we look at the direct material cost, there will be a formula that must be applied. So we say opening balance plus purchases plus carriage on purchases, and then minus returns. Remember, if we are not happy as the business with the material, we can also return it back to the supplier. It could be because maybe they are of quality, or maybe it's an incorrect order, so we can be able to, or maybe they are damaged. There are many reasons why we can return. So we are still allowed to do that. And then lastly, we also minus the closing balance. So this is the formula that we need to apply every time when we have to calculate the direct material cost. So I hope all of you are now going to apply it when we do the activity. And then secondly, we also have the direct labor cost. With direct labor cost, we need to understand that we have employees who are working on a weekly basis. We have employees who are working on a monthly basis. So if they are working on a monthly basis or either on a weekly basis, we pay them the basic wage or the basic salary. So first of all, we need to calculate how much are we going to spend on the basic wage and the basic salary. In most cases, they will give us, in terms of wage, they will give us the number of hours that the employees worked for, and then we'll multiply them by the hours worked by the employee, and then we'll also multiply it by the rate per hour. So it means this rate per hour now will be the amount of money that we pay per hour. So once you do that calculation, it will give you a basic wage. But remember, these people, they are also entitled to a bonus, because every employee is expected to be given bonus as a token of appreciation for the job that they are doing for the company. And then sometimes, if let's say we are also under pressure, we need to produce 1,000 units and then we need to deliver tomorrow, we can also allow some of the employees to work overtime. So meaning overtime now will be the extra hour that the employees worked for. So therefore, we still have to pay them for whatever the amount that the hour that they've worked for. And then the rate can also be determined by the business of how much are they going to give for overtime. So we also have to calculate and add them as well. And then lastly, that will be the employer's contribution. Remember, in grade 10, we did salaries journal and wages journal. On those journals, there are deductions that the employees are doing for themselves. Some of them are compulsory according to the law. Some of them, they are only done because the employees want them. Let's make an example with a pension fund. A pension fund, UIF, and income tax, those are the compulsory deductions. It means the employees must be able to contribute for themselves. So while they are contributing for themselves, now as the business, as the employer, we also have to contribute for them. So whatever the amount we spend on the employer's contribution, it is also going to form part of the direct direct labor cost. So this simply means now these are our calculations that we need to know. So I'm going to erase now so that our answer book can be clean again, so that whenever you do the calculation, you can do them by yourself. All right. I think now we can start with our activity. So when we go to the first activity, we can read the information. It says, use the words in the block below to complete the statement that follows. Write only the answer next to the question number 5.1.1 up to 5.1.3 in the answer book. You remember in our lesson, we said one of the objectives is for you to understand the concepts. Now, the question here, it is mainly based on the concepts. And then the first question says, dash are expenses that incur to run a factory, but none of them are directly involved in the making of the product. So it means now we are looking at two things. These are the costs that we use to run the factory. So this is our first thing that we need to look at. Secondly, these are the costs that are directly involved in making expenses that incur to run a factory, but none of them are not involved in the production. So it means now this cost, they are going to be the factory overhead cost. Why are we saying they are the factory overhead cost? Is because one, we use them to run the factory, but none of them, they are going to be involved in the production process. But however, they are going to be expense that will incur in the factory. So therefore, it will be factory overhead. And then the second one, it says dash indicate that the number of units to be produced to avoid making a loss. Now, when you run a manufacturing business, you need to know at how many units am I supposed to produce before making a profit or a loss. If you refer to economics, there is a topic of price theory. In that topic, they deal with demand and supply. There's a point where demand and supply are normally equal. Like for instance, this one will be a supply and this one will be a demand. Now, as we can see at this point, they normally meet. So we call it equilibrium point in economics. What does that mean? It simply means at this point, both demand and supply are equal. They are equal. So now, when you go to math literacy, I think is the topic of income and expenditure. There's a point where income and expenditure are also equal. And in mathematical literacy, at that point, we normally say a business is not going to make a profit or a loss. And then when we go to mathematics, I think it's on functions where they deal with y-axis and x-axis as well. So you will see at that point, y is going to be equals to x as well. So at that point, it means they call it an intersect point. It means y and x, they are also equal. But now let's refer the same thing now into accounting. Into accounting, we are saying they must be at a certain point when we produce. At that point, we are not going to make any profit or a loss, meaning it's a guideline. Hence, we spoke about a break-even point analysis. It means we are guiding you to say, at this point, if you produce this number of units, you must know that you are not going to make a profit or a loss. So meaning a break-even point, it is going to indicate the number of units to be produced to avoid making a loss or even a profit. So meaning it guides you when you run a manufacturing business to say, at least you must be able to produce a minimum number of goods or services in order for you to make or to reach a break-even point. So, you know, if it says, for example, you need to produce 500,000 units, then you know, once you produce less, it simply means the business is going to run in a loss. But once you produce more, meaning more than 500, let's say you produce more than 500, let's say you produce 600, that additional units of 100, that's where now we start calculating the profit that you are going to make in the particular business. So the break-even point is a very good analysis because it indicates the number of units that the business must be able to produce without making a profit or a loss. And then 1.1.3 says, dash do not change even if the quantity produced by the factory changes. You remember we spoke about that concept earlier. We said no matter how much you produce, they don't change. Whether you produce more or you produce less, they don't change. So this simply means now the fixed cost will be the answer for 1.3. Why the fixed cost? Because they are fixed. This simply means they do not change, as the question says, they do not change, irrespective of whether the production changes, but they don't change. They still remains the same. So these are the first three questions with regard to the concept. But now let us go to the calculations. Now here we are going to do few calculations around this one. It says now the school choice factory shop. Mary Ntuli is the owner of the business which produces and sells school uniforms. And then the information below relates to pairs of the trousers that her factory is producing amongst other items of school uniform. Now it says here, prepare the factory overhead note. And then that is the first question that we need to do. Secondly, it says calculate the following on 29 February 2026. Direct material cost as well as direct labor cost. I'm going to start with direct material cost. You remember we spoke about the formula. I said for you to calculate the direct material cost, it simply means you need the formula. As the information has indicated here on the balances, it says the 1st of March 2025 and 29 February 2026. What does that mean? The 1st March 2025 means the balance at the beginning, and then 29 February 2026 means your balances at the end. So now let's apply the formula. The formula goes as follows. Opening balance. When you go to information A, our raw material, the opening balance is 264,500 plus the purchases. Now we must go and look if we purchase the material during the year. When we go to information B, it says purchases of raw materials 1110,800. It means now we are going to say plus 11. Let me just go to it again just to verify. 1110,800 is going to be 1110,800. And then now we have to go again to the formula. It says plus carriage on purchases. And then when we continue with our information on B, it says carriage on purchase of raw materials 43,300. Now we are going to say plus 43,300. And then it says minus returns. Now we need to go and look if there is any returns that was done by the business. Now, when we go to information C, additional information number 1, it says the bookkeeper forgot to record an invoice for 200,000 on which a trade discount of 30% was received for raw material. So in this question, there is no return, but however, the business managed to purchase again. That's why we see the word invoice. It means we managed to purchase again. But when we purchase these goods, there is also a 30% trade discount, meaning it must be subtracted. Now, how are we going to do this one? We are going to say 200,000 multiply by 170 over 100. Why 170? Multiply by 70 over 100. Let me erase 170 and then place it as 70 over 100. Then it is going to be 200,000 multiplied by 70 over 100. Then it is going to give us now how much? It's going to give us 140,000. It simply means the 60,000 out of 200,000 will be a discount. So therefore, we are only going to add 140,000. Why? Because we only spent 140,000, not 200, due to a discount. And then when we continue, there are no returns. Therefore, we only have to subtract now balance at the end. Now, when we go to information A, the balance at the end of raw materials now is 221,000. So we are going to say minus 221,000. And then therefore, we will be able now to have our final answer. I think you are calculating it wherever you are. So I'm expecting you to give me that answer. But however, the answer will now be 1,337,600. And I hope that we all got the same answer. Now, let's look at our direct labor cost. You remember, I gave you the formula to look at the number of things. One, we look at the basic salary, but let's go and look at our information that has to do with our labor. When we go to information number 3, it says salaries and wages include the following. Bullet number 1, a salary of the factory foreman. Remember, a factory foreman, it is no longer a direct labor, meaning we can still produce without him. So we cannot regard this as our direct labor. So we leave it. And then we go to the next bullet. It says salaries to the administration staff. Now remember, the administration staff, they work in the office. They are not also part of the production process. So we also ignore them. And then we go to bullet number 3. It says earnings by the factory workers are reflected in the following totals from the wages journal. Now, what is important here is the word factory workers. So meaning these factory workers are the employees that we are looking for. These are the employees who worked directly in the production process. So now, these are the employees that we need to use if we want to calculate our direct labor cost. So first of all, we need to calculate how much did we spend to them. As we can see, we have their deductions, we have the employer's contribution, and we have a net wage. But I want you to remember that as the business, what is a net wage? A net wage is the payment that the employees get after deduction. So we agree that this amount is the amount that we are going to give to the employees after we have subtracted this one. So what does that mean? It means as the business, we paid something before. The something that we have paid before as the business, it will be a gross wage. Now, it means we need to go back and calculate how much did we actually pay to this employee. Now we are going to say the net wage, which is 735,000, plus we take it back to the original amount, plus the deduction. So the total deduction is 203,700. Now, once we add them together, they will give us a gross wage. And then now, remember, I said to you, we also have to look at the employer's contribution, if it's there. If it's also there, we also have to add it as well, plus 55,800. And then we spoke about the bonus, but as we can see here, no employees has qualified for a bonus. So basically, our calculation will have to end here. And then when we add them together, all of them, our final answer should be 995,100. And I believe you also got the same answer. All right. Now, I will go back to the previous slide where we still remember that we need to calculate. We calculate direct material cost. And then now, myself and you, we also calculated the direct labor cost. So remember, we did the calculation just now. As I said earlier, that the aim is also to understand the production cost statement. Remember, we spoke about the format. Each format starts with direct material. Now, after calculating the amount of direct material that we got here, it must be transferred to the statement, meaning that amount will be 1337,600 is the one that we have calculated. Now, we recently calculated the direct labor cost as well. And then our final answer was 995,100. Now, on the production cost statement, remember, the format after this, it will be the prime cost. And on my concept, while I was explaining, I was trying to show you to say, when you add this together, they will definitely give you the amount of a prime cost. So now, let's add them together just to see how much are we going to have as the prime cost. Because remember, in our concept, we also had the prime cost. So I'm trying to show you now how do we calculate the prime cost. So when you add them together, they must add up to 2,332,700. So that will be your prime cost. So remember, after this, it will be factory overheads. It will be factory overheads. Factory overheads. Let me just correct my handwriting here so it can be clear. It will be factory overheads. But remember, this is the one that we are going to calculate above. So once we got the amount, remember that amount must also be substituted there. But when we do the factory overhead, I want us to start again from information A. On information A here, we have indirect material as well. So the indirect material will also form part of our factory overhead cost. So when we go back to our answer book here, I will write it here, indirect material. Now, the indirect material, when we calculate it, we still use the same information that we used on direct material. The same formula that we applied on direct material, it can also be applied here. But what does it say? It says the opening balance is going to say the opening balance Now let's go to information A. On our information A, we have 5,500. As we can see, that is our opening balance. So it means we are going to say 5,500. Plus, we also have to go and look for the purchases. If we did purchase any indirect material during the year. When we go to information B, it says purchases, indirect materials, 46,000. It means now we need to add it back to say plus 46,000 and then minus returns. Let's go and look for returns. If we do have returns on our indirect material. Now, when we go to our information B, there is no any returns on indirect material. Secondly, there is not even carriage on indirect material. But however, there is information number 2 that we must also take it into consideration. But before I go to information number 2, let me go back and now subtract the closing balance. As we can see, the closing balance on indirect material is going to be 11,000. Now we need to go back and subtract this 11,000 minus 11,000, and then we close the bracket. Why are we closing the bracket? This simply means whatever we have now is indirect material, but however, the indirect material can be used in the factory, can be used in the office. So the one that we are calculating here, it should be the one that is going to be used in the factory. So this simply means now we need to determine how much of indirect material has been used in the factory. Now, when we go to our information, it is clear on number 2 to say 3/4 of the indirect material were used in the factory. So it means out of 4, factory only managed to use 3. So when we go to our calculation, we are going to say whatever has been purchased or used, the factory will take 3 over 4. So meaning what will be sent to the factory now, it will be 30,375. That is the amount that must be recorded under the factory overhead cost. So remember, not all materials have been used in the factory, that indirect material. Only 3 out of 4 has been used. So it's very important for you to note number 2 when you do this calculation, as much as you have applied the formula of direct material cost. Now let's go to the next one. And then as we go to information B, we do have now maintenance. Remember, the factory must also be maintained. And then it says here, it's 45,000. Now, what do we do? Before we can record that 45,000, we must go and look for informations that has to do with indirect, that has to do with maintenance. Now, when we go to our information here, number 5, number 3 has nothing to do with maintenance, but number 4, it says the maintenance account was debited in error with the payment for telephone, 10,000. And then it says again, 80% of maintenance relate to the factory. Now, before we can calculate this 80%, first of all, we must go and correct this error. Now we go back to our answer book, to the previous slides, just to see how much was our maintenance. Now, maintenance is 45,000. I'm going to do it here because I don't want us to move to the next slide because it's going to take some time. So let me do them here so that you transfer them to your answer book. So remember, they said 10,000 was recorded by mistake. So let's take it out. Now we take it out and then we are left with, I guess, 35,000 if my calculations are correct. But however, not all 35,000 has been used in the factory. So this simply means we need to multiply it by 80 over 100. Then our final answer there would be 28,000. It means out of 35,000, only 28,000 was used in the factory. Then that will be the final answer for our maintenance. And then the next one that we could also look at is rent expense. We have paid 129,000 or spent 129,408. But however, we need to know how much of this did the factory actually used. And then when we go to the next information, number 5, it says the rent expense include rent for March 2026. And rent was increased by 768 per month from the 1st of October 2015. Now, before we can go to the second statement, we need to consider this, that the rent includes rent for March, which must be subtracted. Now, however, this 768 is the extra amount, but from the 1st of October 2015, remember I said on the direct labor cost, firstly, you have to say 735,600, which is the net wage, plus 203,700, which is the deduction. We need to add it back. And then plus 55,800. So how much does it add up to? So it is correct. It is correct, 995,100. So I believe now we are on the same page. Okay, can we go back to the rent now? Let's go back to the rent. And then on the rent, we are saying there is an extra 768 from the 1st of October up to March. So we need to calculate that extra amount so that we can be able to take it out. So we are going to say 768 multiplied by, from the 1st of October to March is how many months? So it's going to be October, November, December, January, February, March. That is going to be 6 months. October, November, December, January, February, March. That will be 6. So we are going to say 768 multiplied by 6. Now, when we say 768 multiplied by 768 multiplied by 6, it is going to give us 4,608. Now, this is the extra amount that must be subtracted so that we can have the equal rent amount before increase. Now, when we go back to the previous slide, the rent amount there, it is here. It is 129,408. Let me go to the next slide so that I can do it here. It's going to be 129. Let me just confirm. 129,408 is going to be 129,408. Now we need to subtract the extra amount, which is 4608. Now let's see how much are we going to be left with. And then when we say 129,408 minus 4608, it means we are left with 124,800. Now this must be divided by 13. Why 13? Remember our financial year end in February, and then it says here we include the rent for March. So meaning March will add now to 13 months. So now we divide this by 13. This simply means our rent before it increases, it was 9.6. But however, the rent that we are looking for, which is the one for March, is the rent that has increased. By how much? By 7,068. So it means we have to say here plus 768, so that now at least we know how much is rent in March. Plus 768. It means now the rent for March is 10,368. Now this must be subtracted. Now let's go back to the previous slide. Here is our rent. It must be 129,408. How much must be subtracted? 4 is going to be 408 minus. Now we need to subtract the one from March, 10,368. And then we close the bracket. But however, our calculation doesn't end here. Remember, they said what on number 5? They said rent is proportionally allocated to the various departments according to the floor space occupied. Now we need to know how much is our total floor space. For us to calculate our total floor space, we are going to say 600 plus 150, which will add up to 750, plus 250. Now it means our floor space is equals to 1,000 square meters. But out of this 1,000, the factory is going to occupy only 600. So it means when we do the calculations for rent, we will have to say multiply by 600 over 1,000. Why? Because not all the square meters were used by the factory. Out of 1,000 square meters, only 600 was used by the factory. And then our final answer now would have to be for factory, for rent expense, it will have to be 71,424. And then the next one, remember, we are still busy with our factory overheads. Now that we are done with rent, we can go straight to indirect wages. When you go to number 3, the last bullet on the slide, it says 5 casual workers clean the factory. The reason why we are considering them is because of this. They are cleaning in the factory. So therefore, they represent our indirect labor. So I'm going to do the calculation here. It will be our indirect labor. Now the question is, how many employees do we have there? It is 5 casual employees. Now we need to read the information. It says they clean the factory at the rate of 45 rand, and they each worked 192 hours. So we have to multiply this 5 by 192 because those are the hours that they have worked. But for every hour, we give them how much? 45 rand. So we multiply again by 45. So this will be the first payment that we are going to do to those employees. And then that is not only the payment that we have to do. When you read the information, it says 2 of them worked 40 hours of overtime each at the normal rate plus 40%. It means apart from this payment that we are going to make here, we still have to pay another 2 of them who have worked for overtime. So meaning for the calculation of that 2, we are going to say 2, which is the number of employees, multiply by how many hours that they have worked. It's 40 hours, multiply by, look at now what is happening here. They say the normal rate plus 50%. If we recall, the normal rate is 45 rand. So it means we are going to pay them 45 rand plus 50%. So if we were to do the calculation, we are going to say 45 multiplied by 150 over 100. Remember, this is the original amount that they were supposed to be paid for. And then now we add only 50% of it. It means the rate per hour will now be 67,50. It means we are no longer paying 45 rand anymore. We are now paying 67,50. And then when you add both answers that you're going to get in brackets, our indirect labor or wages will be 48,600. All right, now let's continue. Remember, we are still on factory overheads. And then when we go to the next information B again, it says depreciation on factory equipment. It means we are looking for the one of factory. If it says factory, then it will go to factory overheads. And then there is no any additional information that affect factory equipment. It means this will be our final answer, 37,500. And then the last one that we are going to have on factory overheads, it will now be number 3, bullet number 1. You still remember I said this factory foreman is sometimes a person who works like a supervisor in the factory. So that person must also guide other employees. So if that person is there to guide other employees, the person must also be paid. So this amount 39168 will also form part of our factory overheads as well. And then those are all the transactions that has affected factory overheads. And when you add all the amounts in the factory overheads account, they will add up to 607, 579. 607, 579. It means once you have calculated it on the note here, it must be transferred to the production cost statement. And then once it gets here, we are now going to have the total manufacturing cost. So it's TMC, total manufacturing cost. So this simply means now for you to get the total manufacturing cost, you must now say your prime cost, which is going to be 233,2700 plus 607,579. That will add up to 29,4027. Okay, let me just do it here because it's going to affect my screen here. It's going to be 29,40,279. That will be our total manufacturing cost. And then if you can recall, immediately after total manufacturing cost, we are going to have work in progress at the beginning of the year. And when we look at information A, we do have 123,410. So it will be here, 123,410. And when we add it as well, it is going to give us a material available for use. And we still need to calculate it. Even though when we do it in on our answer book, we normally leave that space open without writing anything. But what matters is that as much as we leave it without writing anything, but the amount must always be calculated. Now, when you calculate it, it is going to be, when you add them together, it will be 30,636,689. And then from there, we need to have work in progress at end. And this is the only amount that must be subtracted. Now, when you go to our information, it says work in progress at the end is going to be 345,800. Now, we put it inside the bracket because why? It must be subtracted. And then at the end, after subtracting it, we are going to have the total cost of production for finished goods. Remember, this is the part that I've added on the question. It was not asked, but I just decided to add it so that, as you know, that after calculating them, they must be transferred somewhere. All right. Now, after having this total of 30,636,689, now we have to subtract our work in progress at the end, which is 345,800. 800. Now let's continue. Now this is the activity one. I think we are done with activity one. The only thing that we were busy calculating before we got a question from the school, I think we were looking for the total cost of production for finished goods, which is the what we were trying to calculate. I said for you to calculate it, you still have to say your available material for use. Remember, we don't even write it. Is that a blank space that we normally encourage for you to leave? But remember the amount we are looking for it. So after calculating it, you still have to subtract your work in progress at the end, which is 345,800. Then it means now your total manufacturing, your total cost of production for finished goods will be 27,17,889. After all, with all the calculations that we are busy with, the aim is to do the production cost statement. But however, it is going to be difficult for you to get it right while you don't know how to calculate your factory overheads, how to calculate your direct material, as well as how to calculate your direct labor cost. So once you know how to calculate those three, I'm telling you, when you get to the production cost statement, you're going to get 100%. So I believe now we can go to the next question. And then our next question will be in this format. I believe you also have activity 2 with you. And then with this format, the answer book like this one. As you can see in the previous activity on the direct material cost, we only used one line to do the calculation. So another way of asking this question will be in this format. There is nothing new. It's still opening stock at the beginning or opening balance. So you can still write it here and then plus purchases. So we can still have our purchases here. And then remember, after purchases, we can also have what? We can also have carriage on purchases. So we can still write our carriage on purchases here again. And then after that, it will be raw material available for use. And then we can also leave it or write it. It's up to you. And then lastly, we are going to have raw material returns. If we do have returns, we can also include them here, returns, if they are there. But sometimes also in the purchases, you can include your returns there. There's still nothing wrong with it. And then again, lastly, we'll have our closing balance. That must be subtracted. Remember this one, it must always be in brackets. So this is the format that we are referring to. So we can ask it in this fashion again, or we can do it with the like we did in the previous activity. But without any waste of time, let me go straight to the activity so that at least we finish this activity as well. And then when we look at our information, we're gonna start again with our concept. It's very important for you to consider the concepts. Don't take them for granted, because you might lose your level 7 if you want to, because you say, no, now I'm only covered with the calculations. Then you get this one wrong. Then you end up losing your level 7. So it's very important for you to consider the concepts. Now the question says, state whether the following statements are true or false. Now break-even point represent 2.1.1 says the break-even point represent the number of units that needs to be sold to cover all the costs, but no profit is made. The statement will be true, because yes, at that point, there is no profit, there is no loss, but all the costs are covered. And then 2.1.2, fixed cost increase when the factory produces more and decrease when less is produced. That is absolutely false. Why? Because they are fixed. They don't depend on decrease or increase of the production, either decrease or less. It doesn't depend on that. As long as we produce, we still have to pay. Whether we did not produce, we still have to pay. So the answer is false. And then 2.1.3, prime cost represent the total of direct material and direct labor. That is true. Remember, I said prime cost. When we do the production cost statement, you still remember we calculated the prime cost. And what did we do? We took direct material and then we added with a direct labor. So the statement is true. And then 2.1.4, the factory overheads are expense incurred to run a factory, but none of them are directly involved in making of the product. That is true. Remember, they are not involved, but we still use them to run the factory. So this statement is true. That is our factory overheads. So these are the concepts that are more important for you to know. Now, this one, we still have to calculate our direct material cost, direct labor cost, and factory overhead. So this simply means I'm going to move a little bit faster. Why? Because again, these are the calculation that we did in the previous activity. So now at least you are familiar with them, you are familiar with the formulas. So now our life is going to be a little bit much easier. Remember, on this one, we still start with our opening balance. But let me read the top part, because it's important for you to note when is your financial year end, so that you know what is your opening balance, what is your closing balance. Now, with direct material, we are looking for the opening balance. This is 2025, this is 2026. So therefore, this 2025 will represent your opening balance. So it will be 140,000 plus. Now we are looking for the purchases. When you go to this information on the right-hand side, you can see we have bullet number 1 there. It says purchases, 350, 500. And then now it means our purchases will be 350, 500. And then it says the second bullet, the raw materials returned to the supplier is 6.5. So now we say minus 6.5. Now it means we go to the third bullet. It says carriage on raw material 4.6. So we are going to say plus 4.6. Now it becomes easy for you because we have done it before. And then now we only have to subtract what? Because there are no returns. In fact, yes, in this one, we do have returns. In the previous one, we did not have any returns. Now we subtract the closing balance. Now we go back to 2026. Our closing balance will be 128,000. Now it means our direct material cost will now add up to 360,000. I believe we all have the same answer. Now, we need to move on to the next one, direct labor cost. Now, for us to calculate the direct labor cost, we are going to go to information, bullet number salaries and wages, bullet number 2. It says there, the salaries and wages amount is distributed as follows. So these are the percentage on how we are going to divide our salaries. But when we go to bullet number 1, it indicates there how much the total gross salaries and wages for the year. As we can see there, for the whole year is 320,000. This simply means for direct labor, we are going to say 320,000 multiplied by 50 over 100. That will add up to 160,000. But remember, we also need to consider what? The employer's contribution. It says the employer contributes 6% and 1% of the gross salaries and wages towards what? The pension fund and the UIF. As we can see that the total amount that we are paying is 160,000. Out of this 160,000, the business must still contribute 6 plus 1, that is going to be 7%. Now, when we calculate this 7%, is going to add up to how much? It means we have to say 160,000 multiplied by 7 over 100. It means we are going to contribute 11,200. Now, to get our direct labor cost, we are going to say 160,000 plus the employer's contribution, which is going to be 11,200. Now, our direct labor cost will add up to 171,200. So this is how you are supposed to get your direct labor cost. We move on if there are no questions. Now we need to go to factory overheads. In factory overheads, the first one there that we need to calculate is indirect labor. Remember, out of this salary, we need to calculate the 20% of indirect labor. So it means for indirect labor, we are going to say 320,000 multiplied by 20 over 100. Now we need to know how much are we going to get here. It means for 320,000 multiplied by 20 over 100. It means we were supposed to pay 64,000. We were supposed to pay 64,000. But remember, there is also employer's contribution that must take place. So we can still say this multiplied by 107 over 100. Why 107 over 100? Because we are going to add the 7% of the amount. Multiply by 107 over 100. That will add up to 68,408. Can you see I did this calculation differently? Here I was looking for 7% individually and add it there. Here I'm adding that 7%. So it will depend on you which method do you understand. This one is the longest method. This one is the shortest method. So you can do any method that you feel better with or the one that you understand better. So you can apply both methods. When we go to our information, because we are done with salaries and wages, we go to other costs. We have depreciation on factory machine, which is equipment, and that is 21,000. So we take it as it is because it does not have any additional information. And then the next one would be water and electricity. As we can see there, the amount that was paid is 96,000. But however, bullet number 1 says the water and electricity bill is shared among the factory administration and selling and distribution section in the ratio 3:2:1. When you add them together, they give you 6. It means the factory is going to use 3 out of 6. Therefore, our final answer will be 48,000. So that is a water and electricity. And then the next one, I see a question there. It says direct material cost is 360,600, not 360,000. All right, let's go back to our calculation of direct labor cost. Remember, I said, firstly, the total amount is 320,000 multiplied by 50 over 100. So when you divide 320,000 by 2, it will definitely give you 160,000. I believe on that one we agree. And then from there, from 160,000, we must still pay employers' contribution. So the employer's contribution will be paid on what we have paid to the employees. Now it says there, it must be 6% of pension and 1% of UIF. When you add them together, they are giving you 7%. So when you divide it by 100, definitely it must give you 11,200. And then when we get there, we are going to say 160,000, which is the original payment that we made to our employees, plus 11,200, which is the employer's contribution. Then it must give you 171,200. All right. Remember, we are on water and electricity. We are done with it. Now we go straight to indirect material. You can see that the indirect material, as I explained, we can still use that formula that we applied before, where we are going to start with the opening balance. When you go to your information, indirect material, we open with 16,000. So we are going to say plus the one that we have purchased. When you go to information, the one that I'm doing the calculation on, there is 33,600 of indirect material that was purchased. So therefore, we have to add it, 33,600. And then we have to say minus returns. When we go to bullet number 2, here, it says indirect material costing 8,000 were transferred from the factory to the administration office. So this time we did not return, but we took it to admin. So we subtract it. And therefore, now we must say minus balance at the end, which will be 11,500 minus 11,500. And then now our final answer for material, indirect material, it will be 30,000. That will be our final answer for indirect material. Now, when we look on the next one is sundry expense. The sundry expense, what has been paid is 85,600. Now, let's look at our information, which is bullet number 3. It says sundry expense includes a prepaid telephone account of 1.6. So it means we need to subtract 1.6 first. And then immediately after doing that, now we can consider the next statement. It says 80% of all the sundry expense relate to the factory. Now we can multiply it by 80 over 100, which will give us the final answer of 67,200. That is how we do our sundry expense. And then the last one is rent on our factory overheads. Now the rent amount that we have paid is 220,000. Now the last bullet speaks with rent. It says the rent amount for February 2026 will only be paid in March 2014. Remember, our financial year ends in February. So the one for February we did not pay. We are only going to pay it in March. But this expense has occurred this year. So meaning the expense for February must still be part of the financial year. So what does that mean? That simply means that 220,000 is actually equals to 11 months. So we can just divide it by 11 just to see how much are we paying per month so that we know how much are we owing for February. That will be paid in March. So when you divide it by 11, it will definitely give you 20,000. Now, what do you do when you go to the rent? You say plus 20,000. Now our rent is equals to 12 months. Now, what do we do now? We need to allocate. So the rent is allocated according to the floor area. The areas are factory 1.2, and then the shop 100. When you add them together is 1.3, and then the office is 300. Now, when you add that 300, it becomes 1.6. It means out of this, the floor area of 1.6, the factory is only going to use 1.2. So we multiply by 1.2, we divide by 1.6. And then our final answer here is going to be 180,000. So that is how we have allocated our rent. And then when you add them together, they will definitely give you 4,1, meaning our factory overhead final amount will be 415,380. Our direct labor cost will be 171,200. Our direct material cost will be 360,000. Now, what do we do now? Remember, I said the aim of this activity it was supposed to be, let me go to the next slide so that I show you something. The aim of that activity, I'm not going to do activity 3, I'm just trying to show you something. The aim of doing the calculation is actually to complete this. So we have a direct material that we have calculated, myself and you, which was 360,000. Now we have our direct labor, which we also calculated, and our final answer was 171,200. So this means now we must calculate the prime cost. So to calculate the prime cost, we are simply going to say 360,000 plus 171,200. Then it will add up to 531,200. Now remember, the factory overheads must also be here. Factory overheads. We also calculated it, and then the final answer was 415,380. Now, when we add them together, they give us total manufacturing cost. So it means we must now say the prime cost plus factory overheads, then our total manufacturing cost is going to be 946,580. And then remember I said here it must be work in progress at the beginning of the year. When we go to the previous slides, definitely our work in progress at the beginning of the year, it is given as 160,000. So therefore, we can now include it here, which is 160,000. Now, when we add them together, they must give us the one that I said it is not going to have a name, but we need to write the amount. And then the amount is going to be 11,06,580. And then now here we are going to put our work in progress at end, which I said to you, it must be in brackets. But when we go to the previous slide, we do not have it. But however, it is not a problem if you don't have it. If this is the case, let me tell you something. They will definitely give you an information that says maybe you produced 20,000 units, perhaps at a cost of let's say 1,000 rand or let's say 10,000 rand for interest sake. Now for you to, with this information, you are now able to calculate this part. Now you're going to say 20,000, which represent your units, multiply by 10,000. This is just an example. It is not an actual figures. So, but however, they will assist you now to calculate that one. And then this is what we're going to do as we are finishing with our activities. 20,000 multiplied by 10,000, which will give us almost 200 million. And then, now how can you get your work in progress at the end? It is now going to be a balancing figure. So meaning you're going to say this amount minus the other one. So minus 11,06,580. 80. I understand it gives you a huge number. Remember, it was just an example. I was just trying to show you how can you do it. But this is how sometimes they can allow you to do it. I think this brings us to the end of our presentation for activity 2. Lastly, now I'm going to go to the last slide, which means the last slide now says, this is the end of our session, and I would like to say thank you so much for giving me your time. I hope and believe that you are going to do well in this June examination. Good luck and all the best.